Hello, I'm excited to have you here with me. This webinar will explore Dimension 1 in the instructional shifts within inquiry based learning questions. Select Next to continue. The questions dimension of the instructional shifts is composed of 4 steps. Step 1, start with the standards. Educators must use the 2019 Nebraska State Social Studies Standards as the basis for the inquiry process, as is the standard procedure for all lesson planning. Step 2, find the content angle. Using the social studies standards, find a topic that your students will find relevant, exciting, and propel them through the inquiry process. For this step, it is important that educators understand their students' interest and passion. Relationship building and social and emotional learning can help tremendously in finding the right content angle. Step 3, turn the content angle into a question. During this step, educators will create a compelling question from the chosen content angle. The argument could be made that this is the most important step within the question's dimensions. Educators must first analyze and select the type of compelling question, and then from that, craft the perfect compelling question for their students. Once a good compelling question has been crafted, educators will then set the stage, hopefully inspiring their students to conduct well-researched inquiry projects. And step 4, determine helpful sources. Educators will gather as many resources as they can for their students to use during the next phase of the inquiry process. The resources should be varied across reading levels, types of media, and offer various viewpoints. Select Next for detailed information about each step in the questions dimension. Selecting inquiry topics from the standards may be a little more difficult than you think. There are a few rules of thumb that should simplify the process for you. Begin with studying the standards. Think about your own teaching practices. Do you approach the standards from a chronological or thematic overview? Where do the standards fit within each unit that you are teaching? Examine how vague or specific some of the standards are and if they scream, I'm an interesting topic to you. Once you have looked at the standards from upside down and inside out, make a list of the topics you believe your students will find interesting. Begin winnowing your list until you have a list of relevant and exciting-ish topics. Last, consider the amount of sources that exist for your topic. While Sweden's neutrality through World War II and the Cold War may be riveting topics, it may be much easier to compile text evidence and sources for events like the Bay of Pigs or the Cuban Missile Crisis. The content angle is your hook. It sets the tone for the entire inquiry-based learning project your students will be doing in your classroom. In the book, Inquiry Design Model, Building Inquiries in Social Studies, authors Swan, Lee, and Grant compare finding the content angle to the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. In an inquiry approach, the content angle must be just right. So, you have your 2019 Nebraska Social Studies Standards, a list of topics, and a pretty good idea about the amount of text evidence and resources that exist for each of those topics. Now what? First, after settling in on a topic, consider when and how much time you can devote to the inquiry process. To quote Swan, Lee, and Grant again, your inquiry project should be too big for one day but too focused for one unit. Next, use your topic to narrow in on a specific state standard. The standard will provide clues not only about content, but as to what level of Bloom's taxonomy your students will be working at. If you find yourself working with a dense standard, it is okay to take apart the standard and use only a portion of it. Last, be flexible in your decisions around the content angle. The inquiry process may take on a different task than what you initially envisioned, and that's okay. Remember, inquiry is a process and it is never perfect from the onset. The next step in the process of planning inquiry and developing questions is turning the content angle into a question. There are a multitude of ways in which teachers and students can frame their inquiry questions. Let's take a look at the different types of questions according to Kathy Swan, John Lee, and S.G. Grant. The first is broad brush questions. Broad brush questions allow students to dive into inquiry, often using case studies, and explores big issues like religion, inequities, and democracy. A good example of a broad brush question for elementary school could be, is everyone unique? While higher grades could explore questions like, what is truth? Or does religious freedom exist? And while case studies can be used in development of broad brush questions, they are also a type of question students can use in inquiry. Case study questions carefully examine the details around specific ideas, actions, or conditions. It is an inquiry method that asks students to participate in intensive research that can be both qualitative and quantitative. Once our students have completed a full case study inquiry based project, they will emerge with a multifaceted and complex understanding about the person, event, idea, or item in question. Case study questions can also be historical, like, did the printing press preserve the past or invent the future? Or contemporary, like, should Puerto Rico be a state? Personalized questions provide opportunities for students to connect to the real world. If done well, your students will also see portions of themselves reflected within the inquiry process using personalized questions. This type of compelling question often engages students in the work of inquiry because it examines questions that produce a visceral and deeply personal reaction. Asking our students if they are going to vote can trigger feelings rooted in history, culture, and ascribed value systems. Personalized questions are even able to be posed to our younger students. Elementary age students can grapple with questions like, why do I have to be responsible? Analytic questions provides opportunities for students to engage with in-depth analyses of ideas, events, or phenomenon and can be used at the elementary, middle, and high school levels. Through analysis, educators can help students to develop strong arguments by understanding all aspects from root cause, influences, implications, and possible outcomes. Examples of analytic questions include, why did the Pilgrim Wampanoag friendship go so wrong? And did industrialization make life better for everyone? Comparative questions allow students to compare multiple phenomena and rely on much of the same skill set as analytic questions. One important detail to keep in mind when working with students on comparative questions is that students must first analyze each of the phenomena that you are asking them to compare in order to better understand how the components are related. Once the analysis is completed, the comparison should take an engaging and intriguing turn. An example of a lower level comparative question is, which is better, a map or a globe? While upper level students can answer questions like, how can Americans be happier? We're halfway through. Let's take a look at the final 5 types of compelling questions. As the name suggests, the evaluative compelling question asks that our students determine or make a judgment call on a particular issue. In some ways, evaluative questions combine and build upon analytical and comparative compelling questions because it requires students to first rely on their analytical skills and then compare and contrast social phenomena. What separates evaluative questions from the others is that educators will now ask students to make a judgment on the issue. Elementary school educators might ask their students what symbols best represent the United States, while middle and high school teachers might ask, was the American Revolution avoidable? One of the key concepts of social studies has always been and remains how we address historical and contemporary issues and problems. Problem-based compelling questions are often a favorite of students because it asks that they identify, develop, and communicate solutions to a potential social problem. Examples of problem-based questions are: what should be done about the gender wage gap? And should freedom be sacrificed in the name of national security? As well, the problem students tackle can be local, national, and/or international. The possibilities are infinite. Educators, are you looking to provide a little levity in your classroom as you work through the inquiry process? Well, wordplay questions may be just what you're looking for. Was the New Deal a good deal? And is free trade worth the price? Are middle to high school questions that exemplify wordplay compelling questions. These type of questions are intentionally designed to juxtapose different meanings of words and ideas to push student thought. The next to last type of compelling question is ironic. Now, if you were a child of the 90s, the word ironic should bring to mind the musical styling of Alanis Morissette and her hit song by the same name. That song is also a reminder that dear Alanis had absolutely no idea what the word ironic meant. We, however, are going to use irony appropriately. Ironic questions in inquiry ask students to use their knowledge of irony acquired in ELA to consider meanings below the surface of an idea. Imagine students of all ages wrestling with questions like, is greed good? Or can peace lead to war? Sadly, we have come to the last type of compelling question: mystery questions. Mystery questions engage our students in tracking the elements of unanswered questions. This type of compelling question is important because it helps students understand that history is always evolving and many of us are still trying to make sense of it. Mystery questions also seeks to help students evaluate the accuracy of history's most famous stories. How old were you when you found out that Christopher Columbus knew the world was flat before his voyage, or that the arrest of Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott had been meticulously planned for years? Though we may never know the full and true account of some of these stories, social studies educators can still ask their students to conduct an inquiry investigation like the real story behind the purchase of Manhattan. Social studies is many things, but at its heart are questions. The inquiry design model begins with a compelling question and features the elements necessary to support students as they address that question in a thoughtful and informed fashion. This video describes the role of questions in an inquiry.